The death of Queen Mary II, a legacy of love, duty and heartbreak. On the 28th of December 1694, England lost a queen beloved by many, but marked by a life of sacrifice and sorrow. Queen Mary II, only 32 years old at her death, left a complex legacy woven with threads of duty, love and controversy. Beautiful and intelligent, Mary was adored for her gentle grace, yet pulled by conflicting loyalties, from her devotion to her husband and faith to the painful betrayal of her own father. Her story, full of deeply human challenges, reminds us of the often overlooked resilience that she demonstrated amid political and personal turmoil. Mary's journey to the throne was far from simple. Born to James, Duke of York, later King James II, and Anne Hyde, Mary grew up in a kingdom divided by religious strife. Her father's staunch Catholicism set him at odds with England's powerful Protestant aristocracy. Mary and her younger sister Anne were raised Protestant, a choice that would forever set her apart from her father and his ambitions from the Catholic Stuart line. At 15, Mary was married to her cousin, William of Orange, a man respected for his political shrewdness and military prowess, but seen as reserved in courtly circles. Their marriage, arranged for political reasons only, began without love. To Mary, who had grown up surrounded by charming courtiers, William's strict, serious demeanour seemed unapproachable, and his less than striking appearance didn't help matters. But over time, Mary came to see a loyal, moral man beneath William's reserved exterior, and against the odds, she fell deeply in love with him. Their love story, however, was marked by profound sorrow. Shortly after their marriage, Mary suffered a miscarriage after travelling to meet William near his military camp. She was hopeful that her dreams of motherhood would be fulfilled, but her hope faded as one pregnancy loss followed another. The couple's inability to have children was a painful wound in their marriage. The anguish deepened when William formed a close bond with Betty Villiers, one of Mary's attendants. Betty's presence in their lives widened a rift between Mary and William, leaving Mary feeling alone and betrayed by the man that she had grown to love. Mary eventually found some solace in her adopted home in the Netherlands. Despite the tension of court life, she was welcomed and loved by the Dutch people, who admired her gentle spirit and strong character. For a time, she enjoyed relative peace, far from the fractious politics of the English court. But this peace was interrupted by the turbulent events that began unfolding in England. Her uncle, King Charles II, died without legitimate heirs in 1685, and her father James ascended the throne as King James II. James' rule quickly caused rifts. His heavy-handed actions, including severe punishments for dissenters and attempts to push a Catholic succession, alienated many of his supporters. A rebellion led by James, Duke of Monmouth, an illegitimate son of Charles II, was crushed ruthlessly by Mary's father. Witnessing her father's harsh methods likely planted seeds of doubt in Mary's mind, and his autocratic rule only deepened her misgivings. When her father's Catholic wife, Mary of Modena, gave birth to a son in 1688, fears of an unbroken Catholic line on the throne escalated. Suspicions that the new prince was not the royal child, but an impostor, led to a rumour known as the warming pan scandal, with even Mary and her sister Anne believing the tale. The mounting discontent prompted England's Protestant leaders, known as the Immortal Seven, to invite William to intervene. William and Mary returned to England to take the throne from her father in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. Though a revolution without major bloodshed, it tore Mary between her loyalty to her father and her duty to her husband and faith. Yet Mary chose the crown, driven by her commitment to her Protestant faith and a sense of duty. She wrestled with guilt over deposing her father, a burden she would carry throughout her reign. As co-ruler with William, Mary proved a capable leader in her own right. She effectively managed the kingdom during William's frequent absences on military campaigns against Jacobite forces, notably in Ireland. William's victory over her father's supporters at the Battle of the Boyne solidified their hold on the throne, though it did not bring an end to violence or sorrow. The brutal Glencoe massacre in Scotland and a series of other painful events marred William's reign and left a heavy emotional toll on both of their lives. Mary's life was further complicated by her continuing love for her father despite his exile. Though she remained firm in her beliefs and loyal to her husband, the personal cost weighed heavily on her. In letters to William, she expressed her inner turmoil and often sought his guidance on matters of governance, especially when she faced opposition from within the court and beyond. By December 1694, the final tragic chapter of Queen Mary's life began to unfold. Winter had settled over England, blanketing the landscape around Kensington Palace. Mary awoke one chilly morning feeling unwell, noticing a small rash on her arms. Though she was accustomed to periodic illness, her suspicions quickly grew. Having avoided smallpox in her youth, unlike many in her family, she recognized the dark potential of this rash. It began as faint spots, but they carried with them a foreboding weight. For days, Mary's anxiety over her symptoms grew until the rash spread and her fears were confirmed. Smallpox was a familiar terror in the 17th century, often devastating entire communities and leaving survivors scarred and debilitated. It had claimed members of the Stuart family before, and Mary understood the gravity of her situation. With remarkable composure, she began to prepare for the worst. She was keenly aware of the precariousness of life and the fleeting nature of power, having seen it play out in her family's turbulent history. Aware that her illness might be fatal, she undertook a solemn ritual of organizing her personal affairs, burning her private letters, and setting her estate in order. It was an intimate, solitary process that seemed to give her a sense of control over her fate in a situation that she could not ultimately alter. William was notified immediately, and upon learning of her illness, rushed to her side. He arrived at Kensington, his concern plain despite his usual restraint. For days he barely left her room, sleeping on a camp bed beside her as she lay fevered and restless. The physicians attending to Mary clung to faint hopes, suspecting at first that she might be suffering from measles. Yet, as days wore on, their optimism faded. Despite every remedy they attempted, her condition continued to deteriorate. The rash grew into painful pustules, and her skin took on a ghastly hue as lesions appeared all over her body. Her face, once admired for its elegance and warmth, became nearly unrecognizable. The infection had seized her entirely, pushing her deeper into suffering. During these agonizing days, Mary showed immense resilience, even as the physician's treatments, meant to draw out the illness, only increased her discomfort. At one point she seemed to rally, she managed to eat, and for a brief moment she could sit up in bed, her weakened body trying to hold on to a faint hope of recovery. But this reprieve was short-lived, and the pallor that returned to her skin signaled the disease's grim progression. Soon the pustules on her skin began to darken rather than heal, an ominous sign that dashed all remaining hope. Mary's case was not the common strain of smallpox, but the rare and always fatal form, which would ravage her body relentlessly. In her final hours, Mary was surrounded by those who loved her, Servants attended to her comfort, physicians made quiet adjustments, and William remained steadfast, watching as she grew weaker. Even as the illness robbed her of her physical strength, Mary maintained a dignity that had defined her reign. She faced the end with a quiet acceptance, fully aware of the legacy that she would leave behind. As dawn approached, the groom grew still. William, who had been awake for hours, took her hand as her breathing slowed. Gently, as if slipping into a final rest, Mary passed away in the early hours of the morning of the 28th of December, 1694. The news of her death shattered William, a man who had long been regarded as cold and resolute. Those who had known him to be stoic and reserved witnessed a transformation. He broke down into uncontrollable tears, consumed by the weight of his grief. Overcome, he fainted at her bedside, his anguish so profound that even the physicians and attendants, accustomed to death in royal circles, were moved. Friends and courtiers accustomed to unflappable demeanour were stunned by his open sorrow. "The marble weeps," some remarked, struck down by even William's famously stony disposition that had been broken by the loss of his beloved Mary. For William, her death left an irreparable void. The weeks following her funeral found him adrift in grief. Conversations and moments that reminded him of her would leave him shaken. His relationship with Betty Villiers, the lady-in-waiting with whom he had once been close, came to an abrupt end, and he retreated from society. Mary's absence turned his life into a shadow of what it had been. He abandoned the court festivities they had once hosted together, and withdrew into the dark corridors of Kensington Palace. Friends noted that he had grown increasingly morose and irritable, turning to alcohol in moments of despair. William, who had never allowed sentiment to sway his resolve, was undone, haunted by memories of Mary's warmth and grace. He held on for the next several years, but the optimism and vigour that he once exhibited vanished with Mary. By the time of his own death in 1702, William was a deeply changed man, aging rapidly and suffering from various health problems. He had once described Mary as his heart and anchor, saying, "From being the happiest of men, I shall now be the miserablest creature on earth." Her death marked not only the end of the Queen's life, but also the unravelling of the man who loved her. Mary was remembered by her contemporaries as a figure comparable to Queen Elizabeth I, a testament to her strength, resilience, and dedication to her kingdom. Though her time as queen was brief, Mary II's life was marked by profound love and equally profound sacrifice. She showed courage and strength in a role that she never fully wanted, balancing loyalty to family, faith, and her husband in ways that continue to inspire. We remember her not only as the beloved queen, but as a woman whose life was shaped by the challenges of love, loss, and duty. The ill health and death of Queen Anne Stuart. Anne endured persistent health challenges throughout her lifetime, with her health deteriorating notably from her 30s onward, leading to obesity. Despite experiencing 17 pregnancies, she tragically passed away without any surviving children, marking the end of the House of Stuart's reign with her as its final monarch. Queen Anne's reign was marked by a series of health struggles that ultimately contributed to her untimely demise. Afflicted by reoccurring bouts of gout, she found herself crippled and reliant on mobility aids such as wheelchairs and a type of enclosed chair with poles that allow it to be carried by 2 or more bearers. Despite her efforts to maintain a semblance of activity, her inactive lifestyle led to a noticeable weight gain, further exacerbating her health concerns. In her later years, Anne's physical deterioration became increasingly pronounced, with her appearance reflecting the toll of her ailments. Tragically, her battle with illness culminated in her passing on the 1st of August 1714, leaving behind a legacy marred by the relentless torment of poor health. Anne's last pregnancy concluded tragically on the 25th of January 1700, resulting in a stillbirth. Throughout her life, she endured the sorrow of pregnancy loss and stillbirth, having been pregnant at least 17 times, spanning over a decade, and suffering over 10 miscarriages or stillborn births. Beginning around 1698, Anne grappled with recurrent episodes of gout, characterized by agonizing pains in her limbs that eventually spread to her stomach and head. Given her history of fetal loss and the manifestation of various physical symptoms, medical experts speculate that Anne might have been afflicted with systematic lupus or antiphospholipid syndrome. Alternatively, pelvic inflammatory disease could provide a plausible explanation for the onset of her symptoms, particularly as they coincided with her penultimate pregnancy. Various other factors have been proposed as potential causes of Anne's pregnancy failures, including listeriosis, diabetes, intrauterine growth retardation, and rhesus incompatibility. However, rhesus incompatibility seems less likely, as it typically worsens with subsequent pregnancies, whereas Anne's only surviving son, Prince William, Duke of Gloucester, was born after a series of stillbirths. Syphilis, porphyria, and pelvic deformity have also been considered, but are deemed improbable by experts due to inconsistencies with Anne's medical history and symptoms. Anne also battled with gout, and her battles plagued her throughout her later years, leaving her crippled for extended periods of time. Within the confines of the court, she relied on a chair with 2 poles carried by 2 or more bearers for transportation, or resorted to using a wheelchair to move around. Outside the court on her vast estates, she opted for a 1-horse chassis, which she handled with surprising vigour. The inactive lifestyle enforced by her condition took its toll on Anne's physical appearance, causing her to gain weight significantly. Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, remarked on Anne's transformation, noting that while there remained a semblance of majesty in her appearance, it was overshadowed by a profound sense of gloominess. Sir John Clarke, 1st Baronet, provided a candid depiction of Anne's condition during a visit in 1706. He described her enduring a bout of gout, writhing in extreme pain and agony. His account painted a stark picture of the Queen, with her face bearing redness and spots, accentuated by her dishevelled attire. The affected foot was visibly distressed, wrapped in unsightly bandages. Clarke's encounter left a deep impression, highlighting the distressing reality of Anne's suffering, which resonated deeply with him. Between January and July of 1713, Anne's physical condition deteriorated significantly. The ordeal began during the Christmas season, when she fell ill with a fever and remained unconscious for an extended period of time, sparking widespread rumours of her imminent demise. Although she managed to recover from this episode, her health took another serious turn for the worse in March of the same year. By July, Anne had begun to lose confidence in her trusted adviser, Harley. According to records, she expressed her grievances to the cabinet, citing Harley's alleged neglect of duties, incomprehensible communication, unreliability, and unprofessional conduct, including instances of arriving intoxicated. Consequently, on the 27th of July 1714, amid Parliament's summer recess, she made the decision to dismiss Harley from his position as Lord Treasurer. Despite her declining health, attributed in part to the stress of governance, Anne continued to fulfil her duties, attending late-night cabinet meetings aimed at selecting Harley's successor. However, her condition worsened to the point where she was unable to attend a 3rd crucial meeting due to her illness. On the 30th of July 1714, the anniversary of the death of her beloved son, Prince William, Anne suffered a debilitating stroke, rendering her unable to speak. In response, on the advice of the Privy Council, she delegated the duties of Lord Treasurer to Charles Talbot, the 1st Duke of Shrewsbury. Anne passed away on the morning of the 1st of August 1714, around 7:30 a.m. Her death brought relief to some, including her physician, who saw it as a release from a life marked by poor health and personal tragedy. She was laid to rest beside her husband and children in the Henry VII Chapel on the south aisle of Westminster Abbey on the 24th of August. The funeral of Queen Anne Stuart. On the occasion of her death, the Queen left specific instructions for her funeral in her draft of will, expressing her wish to be laid to rest in the same manner and place as her late royal consort. Despite the funeral being officially classified as private, the ceremony was nonetheless a grand affair, with expenses totaling £10,579. The day before the funeral, the Queen's coffin, draped in purple, was transported from Kensington to Westminster in a funeral chariot. This chariot, notable for its large and sturdy wheels, was drawn by 8 robust horses, all adorned in purple hoods to match the sombre occasion. The coffin's journey to Westminster was a significant event, drawing the attention of many. Upon arrival at Westminster, the coffin was placed in the Prince's chamber of the Palace of Westminster, where a vigil was held in honour of the deceased monarch. The Duchess of Somerset was appointed as the chief mourner, a role of great honour and responsibility, supported by her husband and another male supporter. The Queen's lady-in-waiting and maids of honour were also present to pay their respects, along with 14 countesses who added to the solemnity and grandeur of the occasion. Each of these women was provided with 26 yards of black crape to fashion mourning veils, adhering to the traditions of the time and marking their participation in the mourning process. The actual burial took place on the evening of the 24th of August, a ceremony steeped in tradition and formality. The Queen's interment was marked by the presence of 100 yeomen of the Guard, who were on duty wearing specifically made black coats. Their presence underscored the significance of the event, as they stood as solemn witnesses to the final rites of their monarch. The service itself was conducted by Francis Atterbury, the Bishop of Rochester, who served as the Dean of Westminster. This choice of officiant was somewhat ironic, given that the Queen had particularly disliked him during her lifetime. Nevertheless, he performed his duties with the gravity and decorum befitting such an occasion. In contrast to her feelings about Atterbury, the Queen might have taken some solace in the music provided by 30 children of the Chapel Royal. These young choristers, dressed in their formal attire, lent their voices to the service, a fitting tribute to a monarch who had held music in high regard. Each child was also equipped with a new pocket handkerchief, a small but thoughtful detail that reflected the attention to ceremony and protocol that characterized the entire funeral. The funeral arrangement extended beyond the immediate royal family and close attendants. Even the Queen's household staff were considered in the preparations, though not all were provided with new mourning garments. A special mourning livery, however, was fashioned for Samuel Stubbs, the Queen's rat killer, highlighting the thoroughness with which the Queen's household was involved in the funeral proceedings. This attention to detail, extending even to the less prominent members of the household, illustrated the comprehensive nature of the funeral planning. One of the more striking aspects of the funeral was the size of the Queen's coffin. Onlookers noted that it was even larger than that of her husband, the Prince, who had been known as a very large and bulky man. The size of the coffin necessitated the involvement of 14 carpenters, all dressed in black coats and caps, to carry it. The burden was indeed a heavy one, both literally and figuratively, as these men bore the weight of the final resting place of a monarch who had reigned during a pivotal period in British history. In addition to the carpenters, 6 dukes served as pallbearers, their role more ceremonial than functional, but equally important in the overall pageantry of the event. The final resting place of the Queen was the Henry VII Chapel in Westminster Abbey, a site of deep historical and spiritual significance. As per her wishes, she was laid to rest on the right-hand side of the chapel next to her beloved husband. This placement symbolised not only their personal bond, but also the unity of their reigns, intertwined in history and now in death. The Queen's coffin was positioned close to those of her children, whose bodies lay in a nearby vault beneath the tomb of their ancestor, Mary Queen of Scots. This proximity to her family in death mirrored the importance of her lineage and the continuation of the Stuart bloodline, albeit one that would soon come to an end with her passing. The Queen's funeral, though designated as private, was an event of considerable public interest and historical importance. The detailed planning, the participation of high-ranking nobles, and the inclusion of even the lesser members of the royal household in the mourning process all reflected the significant role that the Queen had played in the nation's life. Her funeral was not just the end of an individual life, but the closing chapter of the Stuart monarchy. The heavy coffin, the vigil in the Prince's chamber, and the final interment in Westminster Abbey were all steeped in tradition, marking the end of an era. In the broader context, the Queen's funeral can be seen as a reflection of the rituals and customs that surrounded the British monarchy at the time. The emphasis on mourning attire, the involvement of various members of the court, and the careful orchestration of every detail were all part of a long-standing tradition that sought to honour the deceased, while reinforcing the continuity of the monarchy. The fact that her coffin was noted for its size and the presence of the children of the Chapel Royal, among other details, all contributed to the lasting impression of the funeral as a significant historical event. In the end, the Queen was laid to rest according to her wishes, next to her royal consort, surrounded by the symbols of her reign and her family. The final image of the Queen borne to her resting place in a purple-draped coffin, attended by the highest-ranking members of her court and her faithful servants, remains a poignant reminder of the solemnity and grandeur that characterised the end of the Stuart dynasty.